My name is Colleen Collis from MSU Denver, and thank you for joining me for my presentation today. My presentation is titled Reimagining Mentoring, an Unexpected Pivot from Professor to Relationship Builder. I'd like to start off with a little background about MSU Denver. We were recently designated as a Hispanic serving institution, and the requirement is that you have at least 25% of your enrollment Hispanic, and currently MSU Denver is at 27%. We are located in downtown Denver, so a very urban setting, and the whole state of Colorado has experienced tremendous growth, and with that has been increases in the cost of living. Specific to our sport management program, our student population is very male dominated with 80% men. However, we do have 30% of our undergraduate students who are Hispanic and 10% African American. However, out of our full-time faculty members, we do not have any faculty members of color. So a little bit about the problem overview. Some of this will be very familiar to all of you, is obviously the impact of COVID-19, but especially on our Hispanic and African American communities who were hit very hard by the virus. And like many of you, I was really concerned, especially about our students and faculty of color. Our students were also very focused on combating police brutality, making their voices heard at these peaceful protests, and navigating the increasingly ugly political campaigns. We do have a very active and engaged undergraduate student population on campus that's very politically motivated and involved, which is great to see. We also have quite a number of undocumented students at MSU Denver, so there were obvious concerns about the DACA and what was going on in terms of decisions about whether that would be renewed or not. So in sum, obviously a very stressful time for our students. A few other things that you all can relate to is almost all of our students lost their internship placements. Some of them lost them midterm last spring. Many of them found them difficult to find placements over the summer and again heading into the fall. We were hopeful that the chaotic, spring and summer would have been a little bit better in the fall, but those issues did not disappear. In many ways, they were amplified heading into the fall. Our students worried about not graduating, missing out on critical experiences and networking opportunities. Many of them lost their jobs. Unfortunately, we had even a few that lost their homes and apartments. So when reading lots of different things over the past few months, I found this quote, "Why waste a good crisis?" It was in something that Abby Wambach had posted, but she was quoting someone else. And I started to think, okay, so with my Pollyanna outlook on life is how could we use this? And I started to think that these new challenges obviously could provide new opportunities for students and faculty to grow and to learn. And I really found that the students now more than ever needed some strong mentoring. So for action plan, the first thing is I wanted to look at myself and see where I was in terms of being able to help the students. And I realized that I was pretty much simply advising when I met with students, which classes to take, career options. And with our junior faculty, in terms of mentoring them, I was focused on, how to collaborate on research and all the general things that we would say. And I wanted to challenge myself to be a better listener and to really try to understand and to meet the students' needs. So I started off by trying to educate myself. So one of the great things that came out of this pandemic was all the free things that we got to attend, the webinars, the leadership forums. I listened to several things on diversity and inclusion from different panels. And then I tried to share what I learned and what I could share with students and my fellow faculty members. So what did we do in terms of trying to help the students? First, we focused on their immediate needs, which were, in many cases, finding internship placements that would not only provide them with an experience, of course, in a safe environment, but would also help them to network and to find supervisors who are willing to serve as a mentor. So what we did, I'm sure, like many of you, is we put out a call for help. We reached out to our advisory board, previous internship supervisors, and some of our close community partners in an attempt to find a good fit. Now, all of the placements had to meet all the criteria for a regular placement, but we also asked that the supervisors be willing to mentor, and we did prioritize people of color. So we were really looking for some mentors that would help our minority students. Thankfully, we were able to create several win-win situations. We placed 3 interns with Chip Baker, who was new to us and really willing to work with our students and love the idea of mentoring. And another local organization where we were able to find placements and site supervisors who were willing to go above and beyond in these past situations. And so it was really great to know that there were supervisors out there and community partners who were willing to take on the additional challenge of being more than just a supervisor. So this shift also was happening with the faculty within our program, trying to shift to more of a mentorship focused advising. And we knew in order to do that, we had to take the time to build relationships. Sometimes we all get very busy and it all just becomes about career advice or classes, but to really focus on building relationships with these students. We worked on becoming more engaged as a resource and as a conduit for opportunities for them. And then also, we realized we'd have to create some meaningful alternative options. Sometimes the internships just did not materialize. And one example that I did with several of our interns is that we allowed them to turn their senior thesis research into a 75-minute presentation for the Intro to Sport Management classes. And they had to not only create a presentation based off their research and their findings, but also to include discussion questions, at least one class activity, and a quiz for understanding. And so we allowed them, if they took on that particular project, to accumulate hours that we would count toward their internship. The other thing that I did was, in meeting with students and working with the interns, is that I was willing to share more of my personal life, which I had been very hesitant to do in the past. And I'm already seeing that allowed me and the students to connect. And I did receive very positive responses from the students about how much they enjoyed, really getting to know each other. I mean, we laughed about our dogs, or we discussed where we had traveled. I even shared some things about, personal family issues with my mom recently, going through chemo, and students were also willing to share some of their family challenges. And then also I made sure that I asked the students what they needed and how I could help. And that was different than asking, do you need help? Because a lot of times they're very hesitant to be honest about that. So I said to them, what do you need and how can I help? Just making that assumption that there is something that we could work on together. And then I had to also let go of that pressure to check every box, follow every rule and requirement, and to allow myself to be more flexible in working with the students. And it just lifted a burden that I think the students really benefited from, and that made me feel a lot better to be able to, sure, we can try that, or, maybe we can get you some extra hours here, or we can work in a different way to fulfill those requirements. And so that just made it much easier to get through the semesters and to provide some flexibility. We also helped our community partners with ideas to enhance their mentoring. So when they offered to do this, we made sure that we supplied examples, and we gave them opportunities to use some of the materials that we have and steered them toward the right resources. And we realized that one other thing that we really want to do is involve our alumni in a more structured format. It was sort of like running around putting out fires these last 2 semesters, but in the future, the alumni do want to be involved, but we realize we need to structure that a little more. So heading forward, that's one thing that we want to do, is to keep them involved and then make it a little more focused so it's easier for them. So some of the successful mentorship initiatives that we had was our advisory board members. We had 2 step up these past 2 semesters, and several select site supervisors, and they've offered to continue in this role, and they would like to formalize the process more about the mentee-mentor relationship. And so that's pretty exciting. We're hopeful to get that into place so that it is more formalized and structured moving forward. The other thing that we focused on was building the students' LinkedIn accounts, and not just looking at them from how do I get my first job, but to really look at it from the eyes of more of an executive of how do you get to that next level, and what can they do right now on their LinkedIn pages that will help them move up faster and not just keep everything focused on landing that first job. And then another thing about focusing on how to continue to move forward is that with the interns especially, I challenged them, and it was really difficult since they had limited face-to-face interaction, to meet 3 new people. And then when they met these people, that they had to talk about at least 3 things that were not related to work. And this was really challenging from them. I had heard about this challenge in one of the leadership forums that I attended, and so I thought I would try it. And it was difficult because everything was virtual, but it was also very difficult for the students to try to talk with someone and engage with them when it wasn't related to their work. And so trying to create that mutual respect from the start, I think they enjoyed the challenge, but it wasn't something, it was sort of like throwing them a curveball. And so it was a bit challenging for them, but I think overall they enjoyed that when they met. And I also reminded them that any of these difficult challenges, especially everything that has been thrown at them with COVID and the impact on the sport industry, is remembering they have to be confident, curious, and it is going to take some courage to get through this. And I wanted to share that with them specifically. The second part of the presentation that I wanted to focus on was mentoring the junior faculty. And so we did have a new faculty member who started a year ago in the fall. And so hadn't been here quite a year when just into spring semester. And then we had a brand new faculty member start this fall during the pandemic, and that created some issues. Obviously, the challenges with nobody being on campus, there was a lack of face-to-face contact and very few chances to make connections, even among our faculty members. So some of the solutions that we came up with, and they seem to work quite well, is I invited anyone who wanted to attend to all types of virtual meetings. So if we were meeting with club members, or if we were meeting, on a topic that I thought they might be interested in, as long as it was okayed by the other either committee members or faculty members, they were free to join. And so I think it helped us have the students, get to know them a little better, maybe put a face with a name. I invited the new faculty members to join in when I did virtual advising sessions. So it kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stone. They learned about how we do our advising and through using degree works, but they also got to hear from and meet the students in those sessions. And then lastly, we tried to put them in some leadership roles, of course, that were related to their areas of expertise. So for example, we had one faculty member who's very strong in social media and marketing. And so even though, she is new to our faculty, I think she really enjoyed and felt included and respected by being able to take on those social marketing initiatives for our program. And another key was to help them divert distractions. So by mentoring, we tried to give them ideas about what they could do to stay focused. And one example I'll share with you is we have what's called a WITS program, which is Write It This Semester. And so it's a 2-hour block of time where it's a workshop on campus every Wednesday. And it's on an obscure part of campus where you can kind of escape and get away from those, students who drop by when you're not in office hours, or those things that take you away from your work. And it allows you to focus. And so although they've been virtual since last spring, I do think just setting that time aside and having those conversations with the new faculty members has helped them in that way. And also making it a priority to listen, especially regarding their current situations, what's affecting them, talking about the importance of work-life balance, and then also acknowledging that personal issues play a huge part in this. If someone has a sick dog or something going on at home, and really being willing to listen to what their challenges are and to help them get through that. We created, I think, a fairly successful some mentoring partnership agreements. And I don't have a lot of time to go into this, but we did not reinvent the wheel. We just searched and found one that I think is really great. And it's out of the California system. And I put the link here if you want to download it. So I'm going to scroll really quickly just to show you the things that I found most useful. But I do think this whole PDF is worthwhile. Talks about why mentor, making sure everyone understands their roles, why it matters. But what I really wanted to focus on were a couple things about when you get your agreement. So actually signing and dating something and agreeing to how often you're going to meet, keeping things confidential, that is huge. Practicing active listening, that's also very important. And so these we put into place, we signed them, we developed individual plans. And this is the part where you have to have a little bit maybe of thick skin. So asking these questions, things you're doing now that you want to quit. Well, you might not like to hear their answer. Things you've just been asked to do that you want to refuse to do. Things that you're doing now that you want to continue. This also may surprise you. But I found these to be really excellent and helpful in moving forward and developing a good relationship with the junior faculty members. And so there's a lot of great information in here that I think you might be useful if you're considering doing something with a mentoring program with your faculty. So focusing back on diversity and mentoring with our students of color, our goal is to expand and to really focus and have that be intentional focus. We also want to continue to move our faculty forward from simply advising to mentoring. And this is probably the most exciting thing that we have in the works for next fall of 2021. So it was started in our nursing program, and they want to do a preceptor diversity training. And they want to also include other interested departments on campus. So I reached out right away because the training is going to focus on recognizing and managing bias in the profession, providing an introduction to culturally responsive training of interns, and then using culturally responsive training techniques as a supervisor. And I think that many of our internship supervisors will be interested in this training, which will be free for them, and we will encourage them to attend. And the other initiative is working, we have a really great Career 2 hub on campus that has a strong focus, and we're going to integrate that into our classes and take advantage of that resource that's already on campus. And a few final thoughts. is that I think recognizing that we truly need to advocate for our students of color and be more active in our sponsorship of them. So not just mentorship, but truly sponsoring them moving forward and taking those necessary steps to get them in the room and at the table. So reaching out with personal invites to things, giving individualized encouragement, and then also asking, how can those students, what skills do you have? What talents do you have? How can you help others? I think that's really important. And also asking, you know, who they would recommend for speakers or panelists. We don't often, we put the blanket statement out there, but I think specifically asking our students of color, who would you like to hear from? Who do you think we should have on the panel? And that realizing that the mentors must be intentional and that each of our students, each of our junior faculty members are unique and that they need differing levels of support. So how can we continue to do this? I've shared some of my ideas. I would love to hear what you have to say. So if you want to attend my live session at the end of the week, I would very much look forward to hearing from you. So thank you very much for attending.
All right. Well, thank you guys for coming to this Q&A session. Is for Reimagining Mentoring: An Unexpected Pivot from Professor to Relationship Builder by Colleen Coles. So thank you for being here. And then, yeah, Colleen, the time is yours.
Yeah, well, whether you watched my presentation or not, if you did, you'll realize this was not a fancy research study at all. This was the call came out from COSBA on mentoring and diversity and equity, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my life right now, right? I was working with a group of interns, which happened to be our most diverse group of interns that I've had at one time, and also mentoring two new faculty members. And so I decided once we survived summer and fall to sort of write up my experiences with trying to be a more intentional mentor, especially with our students of color, but then also trying to be a better mentor to young faculty members, especially in this weird time of COVID where they had no face-to-face interaction. And so in my presentation, I tried to share some of those things, but I was hoping today that you all would also have some ideas to share, or if anything that you saw in my presentation brought up a question that you have. To provide a little bit of background, Metropolitan State University of Denver is a Hispanic serving institution. So we do have 20, you have to have 25% minimum. I think we're at 27%, and that's expected to continue to increase. But I also teach some DACA students. And if you're familiar with DACA, of course, those students don't necessarily self-identify to you, but it only takes a few questions and I usually can figure out what's happening or what's going on. And they're not so necessarily worried, but we do have students who were fearful that their parents were going to be sent away. So we had all this stress going on, and it sort of just motivated me to move from simply advising to more mentoring, but also to seek people that were willing to mentor our interns. And specifically, I looked for people of color, which we have not had very many, but I made it a pact that I'm going to look for this specifically. I don't care if anybody says I'm doing the wrong thing or I'm not giving everybody an equal chance. I didn't care. I reached out to our advisory board. I reached out to our site supervisors that usually take interns. And I said, who can take on this group of students who have sometimes voiced outright or at least come to me personally, and I can tell they need a little extra mentoring right now. I am not a person of color. I can listen and listen and listen, but I can't help them with those experiences. Would you be willing to not only be their internship supervisor, but take on more of a mentoring role? And we had successfully placed all of our interns, luckily, but 5 of those went to supervisors and mentors of color. And I think the outcome was really great, the feedback that I've gotten, and everybody wants to continue. So that's just one part of what I did. I don't know if anybody has any questions, if you just want to chat. If you're exhausted, we could all quit and take a nap. It's up to you.
Well, it's a small group, but I have questions, so I guess I'll start. I'm Emily. I'm at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York. So draw a line south from Toronto, and that's me. I think this was really, really fascinating, but as I'm preparing to do a site visit, I'm curious as how do you assess from the student perspective the effectiveness of the mentorship, and it's great they want to continue, but how did you grab that knowledge?
Right now, I'll be honest, it was informal right now. I had them write reflective responses to that. We just asked some pointed questions about what they got out of that. And then I did the same thing with the mentors, with the mentees, but I'm going to admit, this is what needs to happen. We just had a few over the summer and this past fall. So I was just grabbing what I could at that point, but I hear you. The most important thing now is going to be, just like many of these things, the intangibles, is how do we really assess that? And if my chair were to ask, was it worth it or what's the outcome? All I have right now is that anecdotal, this is what they wrote and this is what they told me. So yeah, I mean, you're right on with, and that's kind of the next step.
I have a quick question. Mine's more of like almost like a personalized question. I really appreciate all the student stuff, and I think that we need to keep sharing that, because I know I've heard a lot of stories from other people, and that kind of informal mentoring happens everywhere with COVID these days. But for me, it's more like I'm a junior faculty, and our university has a mentoring program set up, but they started it after I came on. So I don't have like that formalized structure, and nor does one of my other colleagues. So how can I, and then also encourage him to seek out the mentoring relationship?
I think that's a great question. I think you've already answered the first question, is that you want to do it. I've found that sometimes universities assign mentors to every new faculty member, and sometimes there's not that desire, but it's mandated. And I think the key thing is you're in a role now where they started it, but you're also in a unique role now where you can be more precise in what you're asking for in a mentor. And I would screen them just like I would a job applicant, is sort of put your feelers out, but only reach out to those people who you're pretty confident have the background and the experience and the knowledge to sort of guide you through. And it may not be the person that you think it is. Like, you may think you want a woman who's been in a leadership position, and maybe it's a male who is a faculty member in chemistry. I mean, I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but
that would work for my department.
Yeah, sometimes I think we get too narrowly focused on who can be a good mentor. And a lot of it is connecting on those other levels, but not necessarily has to be someone in sport management, or it has to be a woman who's lived my experience. But I do think that you'll find, even if it's not compensated, I mean, we get service credit for being a mentor here. Some universities do that, some don't. They only do it if you're in the formal mentoring program. But you'll be surprised about how many people will be willing to do it, even if there's no compensation, even if they're not going to get, university service. And if that doesn't work, look outside your university. Lots of great mentors from, throughout. Is there somebody you've connected with at a conference?
Right.
Is there somebody, maybe pick a like institution, like your size and whether you're private or public, because sometimes those things can be important as you're moving through the process. So that's a little bit. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, that's very helpful, because I know the two of us are kind of in that in-between stage of like, we both want that kind of mentoring process, but there's just kind of like a disconnect happening. So Thank you.
And I think the other thing is, we're trying to formalize this now, is that use those agreements. And so it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm locking into a contract. But when I signed them with our junior faculty, it was just that, yes, we're agreeing we're going to meet once a month. And then if somebody falls off the pumpkin truck, we're like, hey, wait a minute. We both signed this. I know we're both busy, but we agreed to meet once a month. We agreed to keep things confidential. We agreed all of these things. And so there's little simple things that I think you can set in place that'll help it, because lots of times everybody has great ideas and then they fizzle out. in about 2 months. So put those things in there and make sure they're on your calendar, they're prioritized, and you don't skip them, that it becomes part of, like if you were serving on a committee, that you wouldn't just not show up. So
Thank you so much. And I do have to run. So thank you. I really
Okay.
appreciate your presentation.
Bye, Maggie.
Bye.
Anybody else?
I always have questions. I just don't
Good.
want to hog airtime. So you talked a little bit about your preceptor diversity training and sort of what went into that. Could you talk a lot more about that? I think it's so important to think about that you're not just, again, putting people together, but people that are ready to deal with some of the hard issues.
Right. So the great thing about that is it's coming. It hasn't happened yet. So it's in the planning stages. And actually, the one question I wrote for all of you today, I have to look on my thing here, is what do you think should go into this? So this was started in our nursing department, and they're collecting feedback from all of us right now. But their big thing is going to be on recognizing and managing bias, and then also teaching them to do culturally responsive training with the interns that they supervise. And I've already informally reached out to some of our internship supervisors, and they're like, hey, if it's free and we can do it, we're interested. And so we're pretty excited about that. But my question for anybody who attended today is they're looking for our input. So if you have ideas about, it could be sports specific related, but also generally like what has to go into something like that? What's something that we think is a priority? That needs to be addressed. And so I would welcome any thoughts on that as well. And I'm hoping to report back maybe next year at COSMA on how it went. But since that's still in the planning stages, it's just something we're super excited about, but I haven't participated, nor have our site supervisors yet.
I mean, I think it's an obvious one, but, language, the words we choose, especially when we're talking about, whether it's person first language or whether it's, some of those, I mean, obviously in sport, we talk about gender marking all the time, but some of those sort of maybe unintentional phrases that when you unpack a little bit are really problematic in a lot of ways, but because they've never been questioned or discussed in a frame of critical thinking, I think that becomes really important. I would guess that your institution, because you're Hispanic serving, does a lot better than some of the rest of us with a lot of things. But I would say that obviously is something that definitely has to be there, but I'm probably sure that's on your list.
Yeah, but I think you make a good point. Even though I do think the university does work really hard. I mean, we have people in our, not in sport management, but in our own department, there are several people who don't believe in microaggressions, right? They don't want to understand, they don't want to accept the concept, they don't think it exists. And so I think we have a lot of work to do. And I'm hoping that when this workshop is put together, that all types of those things are included. And I do agree that language is so important. And I admit, I screw that up sometimes too. It's not intentional, but the only way we're going to get better is if we make mistakes, we're willing to admit it, and then we learn and move forward. And so, I hope that plays a big part in that. And also, I was at an earlier session today, and they were talking about making sure that, within diversity, we get a lot of information about gender diversity, different racial and ethnic backgrounds, but making sure that they include things that have to do with disability in terms of inclusion, and how do we teach interns that just because somebody might be hearing impaired, that we don't judge them, that they can't work in game day operations for baseball, or if, it could be a physical disability or whatnot. But I often think we don't talk to our students about, yes, it's important to include women and different, backgrounds and ethnicities, but we sometimes leave that part out of if someone has a disability, to see how that can be viewed as a strength and welcome them just as much as we would welcome anyone else. And I was taking notes on that because I think that's what I'm going to add to my feedback to this group that's planning. how do we prepare interns to work with all kinds of people, and really mean all being super inclusive, and not limited in that view.
Is there some room in your feedback to talk about people talking about these things, that if somebody has a physical disability, you can probably say it out loud to their face because they know that, it's not an embarrassing thing or something not to be mentioned. These are things, sometimes sometimes things are on the surface and sometimes, of course, they're not, but to somehow work in the piece of being comfortable talking about these things. Is that
I think you make a great point, because sometimes our students are more comfortable than our faculty are talking about some of these things. But I also think that we're doing everyone a disservice if we don't get uncomfortable and have those conversations. And so I'm writing that down too. That these are the sort of things that I want to make sure get mentioned as they're planning going forward about how we can do that, how we can incorporate that, and maybe just have all of us be prepared to get uncomfortable and have conversations, and to maybe think about how we can do that in the most productive way.
Yeah, I know that it can not always work out perfectly, but sometimes people want to be asked, like, you are this, tell me your experience. And sometimes people don't want to be pointed at and asked that, but sometimes it is a way to learn new things or to get that perspective. Or certainly certain people don't have to be singled out. You can say to the group, let's talk about this in terms of race. Let's talk about this in terms of disability. Let's talk about this in terms of sexual orientation, and it can be broader than that, but still address things more directly.
Yeah. And I think if we were all honest about the things we assume about one another, whether we see it or whether we learn something about them that is maybe part of a disability, that just being honest that I made the assumption that because you were in a wheelchair or that you have PTSD, I made the assumption you wouldn't be comfortable working the fireworks game at the Rockies. Okay, now I know that's a stretch, but sometimes I think that I too make assumptions about maybe what would be uncomfortable for that person, or maybe something they couldn't do, and maybe they could do it really well. So how else do we know, without having that conversation?
Are you finding that your students are in a very different place than the faculty, so that there's a generational-ish difference, or whatever you want to call it?
I wouldn't say that, although we do have a pretty diverse campus in sport management. Unfortunately, we're not all that diverse, but I do find in general, they seem to be pretty comfortable talking about things. And this has sort of changed over my career in higher ed. And I very much appreciate that they're a lot more confident talking about things, whether it's gender issues, gay athletes, athletes who, may have all kinds of different issues or things that are going on in the sport world that often used to be conversation stoppers. Nobody went on, the room went silent. I have found that that's been a more natural conversation for them. So I think that we're on the right track that way. But one other thing, and this is just me throwing this out. So, I told you I had some of the most diverse students I've ever had. But I got this from two different students. Now, mind you, it wasn't a group conversations. These were two different advising calls I had. So one of my students, his name is Samba, and my other student's name is Arawa. And both at separate times, they mentioned to me that they were worried that their names were going to be an issue, because they were afraid, as they were putting the finishing touches on their resumes, that people would make assumptions, number one, that they're a minority, but number two, could they speak English and communicate? And they were two of my really good students. But it was sort of when all of those things were happening that I started to think about, that's where they needed a strong mentor, and probably a mentor of color, because that's not me. I mean, my name's Colleen, I'm a white woman, but here were these two very dark-skinned young men with names that it almost broke my heart that they even had a concern that was going to go on a resume and they would be judged by that. And so I don't know if you've all dealt with that, or it's a weird conversation to have, but we had it, and I sort of did the best I could. But I also know that with their mentors,
they got some great feedback about putting their strengths forward and embracing who they were and, using that to their advantage.
It's a really interesting and important thing. I mean, I've looked at lots of resumes and I can tell a lot of things, or I can make a lot of assumptions about people based on that, of course. And I hope that it's used for finding people's strengths and understanding their skills. But yeah, you can tell a lot. If you see when someone graduated, probably how old they are. There's all kinds of different things that you can discern. And it depends what you're looking for, I guess.
Right. And I wrote letters of recommendation for both of these students, and Samba ended up receiving 3 different graduate scholarships to go to 3 different schools for his master's degree. But again, if you watched my thing, I talked more about being intentional. So in those letters of recommendation, I was very intentional about what a great communicator he is. And I tried to focus on his strengths that I knew and I was aware of, but also, I sent him a copy of the letter because I wanted to see how I perceived him. And I think he knew that, but to give him that confidence of, it shouldn't matter if your name is Bugs Bunny, right? If you're qualified, you should make it to that next round. And I'm going to do everything I can to help them learn more about you. And so, it took me a long time to write those 2 letters of recommendation because I didn't just use a template, but I felt better in the end. I know that sounds a little weird, but I felt better about taking that extra time, to do what I could to help.
And that was the sort of follow-up that I had. I had a question about, how do you figure out that intentionality correctly? Like there's so many things we could cover and so many different aspects to a lot of our students. We understand the industry perhaps better than they do, but they also have the things that they're most proud of that they want to highlight. So this idea of what are we going to choose to be intentional about and how are we going to use that? And, we can't put everything in there. So, how do we go about navigating that intentionality?
Yeah. And I think that's probably the $20,000 question. But what I really tried to do is I felt like I could be more intentional the more I got to know them. And that whole part of going from just an advisor to having them share maybe some more of their things, where once we got comfortable, they shared a little more things that they were fearful about, like this name. They shared a few more things about their family or their living situations. And I think by taking the time, which usually we don't have because we're so busy, but by taking just a little bit more time, I felt like some things triggered about where, based on my experience, I thought I could be most helpful, but I allowed them to give enough input to make that decision about, is that important enough for me to focus? Because you're right, I couldn't focus on everything, but I tried to do that. And I'm hopeful that my colleagues will sort of grasp onto this as well, because then I feel like we can reach more students. And I'm going to be honest, this isn't something we can do for every single student in our program. It's just not humanly possible. We would do our best to help everybody, I think, but I also think that there's something to be said for giving some intentional focus on those students who have this great ability to share some wonderful things, and I just want them to have a fair shot. And if I feel like we can make some subtle moves to help that, I feel like we should.
I think you're kind of talking about strategies for equity, to help, because it's not about being fair, or the pictures that have gone out to help people understand what the differences are. That some people need a taller box to stand on, right? And that's okay. And so that to me is legitimate focus on the actual issues to help correct or to reestablish a dynamic when a person is at a different place to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I really didn't feel like I was going to get much feedback. And I thought, well, what am I going to say if somebody says, oh, well, you're not treating every student the same, and not every, all the white students might not be getting this. And I'm very comfortable in my decision to say, I can acknowledge where we all are with things. And I am truly going to put some energy into helping these people where their hurdles, whether you want to admit it or not, we all know those hurdles are higher. And so you know, right. Back to Heather's point is, I guess that was my intent, and I'm hoping the rest of our faculty will embrace that as we go forward. So. Any other thoughts? I mean, it was just sort of my life where I was living and some cool things that I thought were happening that I wanted to share. And I've enjoyed attending the other mentoring sessions because I've learned a lot as well. So, but if people ever have ideas about what we should include in this training and how to be more intentional, shoot me an email. I would be happy to collaborate with you.
Were you able to attend any of the Wichita State University sessions? Okay, because they have a structured program, you know,
Yeah.
so it seems like, I'm not saying it's perfect or something, but they're probably a good resource to talk about what's working, what's not working, or how it's been institutionalized and whether that's good, you know, or to what degree that's effective.
Yeah, I think I attended all of those and they were very good. I took lots of notes, but yeah, it's been helpful. So
Okay, good. Good.
good.
Yeah.
Well, yay, we're all hanging in there.
Yeah. I don't know if any of the quieter people, hint, want to say anything. Okay. Laura. Yeah, I mean, we don't know what's going on. So you may be, I was eating my lunch, you know, and I didn't want you to see that. So
That's fine.
and then my cat just made an appearance quickly.
And that's the joy of Cosma. I feel like it's a small enough group that we can find each other afterward. There's always great follow-up. We can reach out. So I just appreciate that there was more than just me here with Taylor and I discussed that we might be the only two talking to each other. So a little more feedback. That's awesome. Thank you.
I'm gonna put Kizzy on the spot a little. She's also been a moderator, so she's been in the position of possibly having to have a chat. There she is. She's really, you definitely have a lot of stamina.
I do. But I was just listening and taking in what you were saying because I am presently a mentor to international students. We all have different background in which we're studying, and you know, every opportunity is a learning opportunity for me. So
good.
It's just basically it. And I hope I can become mentor to sports students as well sometime in the future.
Yeah, the other thing that I had stressed with both Samba and Arawa is I would love for you, as you move along, to come back and talk to our students and sort of start easing them into that role, because I feel like they have so much to contribute. I would love to get them started and think about, you have all these gifts to give others. Please consider, don't think you don't have anything, but you really do. You can help these other students who are coming behind you. So I hope that they take me up on that.